Okay. Hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to be invited to come and talk to you at the Norway Tug today. I am going to repeat a talk that I did last week at Visit London. I apologise, I haven't had time to refactor my slides, so you've got the Visit London slides again, but hopefully the content will be of interest to at least some of you, and some of you will be as big a nerd as I am. So let's see. Move. Yeah, we go. Right. So hi, my name's Chris. I am a very big nerd. I have been working in data since 1998, which my staff like to remind me is the last century. I have been in the Tableau world since 2010, and I think Tori and I need to measure our trainee lists, because I think we've both trained in excess of 1,000 people in Tableau in our careers. And for the last few years, I've been focusing much more on train the trainer, so training other people to teach Tableau, and also on building products within the Tableau partner that I co-manage, which is called BizTree, building products that just help people make the most of their data, make the most of their Tableau environment. So we build cool little things that, extensions, things that make Tableau server work better. And for the last year or so, we've been working very heavily in the area of how do we make Tableau migrations from on-prem to the cloud easier, better, smoother. So take away the argument that, oh, we shouldn't migrate because it's going to be difficult. One thing I will say, actually, before I start, I am aware that I am a Londoner, and as such, I speak English with a slight London accent and probably speak quite quickly. So if at any point you have any questions, I have the question panel open on my screen. So if you are online and you want to ask a question, just please do use the Q&A section within Zoom, and I will keep an eye out for questions. And Tore, if anyone in the room has any questions, do please feel free to unmute the computer in there and just ask me questions. I'm happy to be interrupted, and also just told to slow down. Right. So things that I'm not going to talk about today. So here's some little bonus content for you. A migrating Tableau server to Tableau cloud is the same as any other migration. It's the same as any software migration. And there are certain things that you're going to want to make sure that you do that are just simple project management common sense. So what am I not going to talk about? Well, I'm going to manage your scope creep by telling you what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about why. Should you migrate to the cloud or not? That is a question for you and for your company. And to quote a good friend of mine, it depends is the answer. Should you migrate or not will depend on so many very specific nuances about what you do, how you do it with Tableau, that I wouldn't want to try and do it here in a talk. It would be a talk in and of itself. And also, a lot of the time it comes across as a sales pitch. And I'm not a salesman, I am a big nerd. So what I'm going to talk about is about the lessons we've learned and what we think is the best way of doing this. The other thing I'm not going to put on the screen is lots and lots of code. You'll be surprised to hear there is no demo of migrating a server to a cloud, because literally you would watch a series of Python API calls scroll up the screen, and it is definitely boring to watch. Okay. What I am going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the stages of a migration and the decisions you're going to have to make along that way, some of the things you can do to make it better, easier, set yourselves up for success. So here you go, clear specification, expectation management. It's important in any IT project. So we're going to talk about planning. I'm going to talk about what you need to know when you're making a plan for migration and how you should go about getting that information. We're going to talk about a little bonus opportunity when you come to planning. We're going to talk about the execution of the migration itself. And I'm going to go, that's where I'll spend most of my time, is talking about the tools, the techniques, the things that we've done to make this whole process a little bit smoother. And at the end, I will touch on testing. Again, I'm not going to spend a huge amount on testing because testing and UAT in itself could be an entire other presentation that we could talk about for about an hour. So there's a lovely phrase that is in the British Army's Officer Training Manual, which is proper prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. And this is super important for any IT project, especially migrations where you're going to be moving large amounts of content or large numbers of assets from one place to another. So one thing you're going to want to make sure you do is to catalog everything you want to move and catalog how you're going to move it. Now, there's a lovely little word cloud on screen, and I built that using a very well-loved data visualization tool. It's probably useful for me to tell you that the size of the words in the word cloud show how many or how often we make these migrations, and the color tells you how difficult it is to achieve, either in a manual or automated way, so how much effort has to go in. But suffice to say, the most important thing you need to do to plan your migration is to connect to your server repository. It's to, if you haven't already enabled the read-only account, get that read-only account set up, download one of the many excellent SQL resources, Postgres SQL statements that were provided as part of Ravi Mystery's Project Griffin, that allow you to query the repository, or there are workbooks that I know Tableau make available to their customers that connect directly to the repository and present you with information. Now, clearly, that's what we did. We created a workbook, we connected it to the Tableau server repository, and then we started analyzing the data about what was on our server and what needed to move. And what we came out with was a number of important things that we want to count. So the first thing, we just want to literally know how many of each type of asset are there. How many users are in how many groups, are in how many projects, and how many workbooks are there, and how many data sources are there, and just what volume of stuff is there to move. Then we start looking at, well, rather than just counting them, how big are they? Because to loop back to something that I'm not going to talk about, which is why or should I move to Tableau Cloud, there's a big gotcha here. If you want to move massive volumes of data onto the cloud, it's not going to work. You're not going to want to be moving massive volumes of data into the cloud because Tableau Cloud has a volume limit. Once we've got the how many things are we going to move, we want to start understanding the complexity of this. So we start looking at how many different data connections do we have? How many of them have complex authentication? How many of them are extracts versus live? How many of our connections are going to be an issue with one of the gotchas I'll talk about later, which is it an on-prem data source versus a cloud data source? Then another great gotcha for moving into the cloud, your users. If you've gone with local authentication, how many of those users don't have an email address? Because if they don't have an email address, you're not moving them to Tableau Cloud. You can't create an account for them. So important little catch is how many users I got and do they actually have an email address so that I can create an account for them in my Tableau Cloud environment. Now, there's some easy things you can do in between. So for example, I've got a list of all my users and I don't have an email address for them. Well, I can go away and find email addresses for the users that I want to have migrated over. If it's a service account, you're going to need to attach it to an email address somewhere because Tableau Cloud requires you to have that to create the account. And then there's the last little bit, which is, well, let's just understand exactly what we can't move in an easy or automated way. So what we call those our non-transferable assets, things that to recreate them, there's a phrase we use, which is the juice worth the squeeze? And there's some assets that right now in the current Tableau climate, the effort of migrating these things is not really worth it. You're probably better off letting them disappear and asking people to recreate their own ones for themselves. So personal spaces, for example, metrics, for example, comments. There is just not an easy way to download comments from one server and reapply them to another location. Custom views I'll come on to later, but that's one of we have this this view to help us understand, well, once we've automated what we can and migrated what we can in this sort of accelerated manner, what's going to be left? What work lists are we going to have left to work through to do these manual steps? The bonus activity. Now, when I did this in person, I asked the question of the room, but as we're doing this virtually, I don't think anyone wants to unmute themselves just to answer a question. But the one thing that you can do, the easiest thing you can do to make your migration quicker, easier, smoother, is to not migrate everything, only migrate the things that you need. So it seems like common sense, but we have now completed what I'd call, we've completed 10 enterprise size migrations of Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud in the last year. And you'll be amazed to hear that only one of those migrations took the opportunity to review their content and decide to keep or not some content. Now, it's super easy to do. You have simple options of, well, I'm just going to move stale content into their own projects, or there is a stale content report that's part of the admin views on server, and you can go through and just tag that that content to say it's stale. It's far easier, I would say, to tag in an exclusive way as opposed to an inclusive way, as in, don't tag things that you want to migrate, tag things that you don't want to migrate, because for the most part, you're going to migrate the majority of your content unless you've had a real case of the Wild West when you set up your server. Okay. To code or not to code? Well, clearly what I've talked about so far is things that we've automated, things that we've accelerated. So, and also I'll take you back to that first slide. I'm a big nerd. So being that I am a big nerd and I'm a bit lazy, I like to code. I like to write code and automate things that mean that I don't have to click 10 times to achieve something. I can just hit go and it does those 10 clicks over and over again for me. So the rest of this talk is going to be around the majority of what we've done, which is around using the available coding tools and the available APIs within the Tableau ecosystem to accelerate the migration and make it less of a painful manual process. One thing you're going to want to make sure you understand is when you're doing a migration, there's an order of operations. Now, I'm sure Torre's done enough talks to you guys about the order of operations within desktop, but when you're creating and assigning permissions, creating content and assigning permissions on the server or on Tableau Cloud, you're going to want to do things in a certain order. You're going to want to make sure you've created your users first, because you need users to assign ownership. So therefore you can't create projects until you can assign an owner to those projects. In the same way that you can't publish content until there's projects within which to put that that content. So you're going to want to create your users, and then you're going to want to be able to create your groups, and then you're going to want to be able to create your projects and folders. Then you're going to publish your content. Okay, you're going to follow that path, and then we start talking about the value add bits. Realistically, you could stop your migration at the content. The value add bit is how we define it, is the content is what's required for people to do their jobs using the data that you're providing in Tableau Server. The value add bit is the bits that make people's lives easier. So do I want to go through and create 1,000 separate custom views? Do I want to go through and create all of the subscriptions and alerts and everything else that goes alongside my Tableau server environment to make people's jobs easier? You can, and we do, but realistically, once the content's on the server, people can start using that new location. When we're talking about automating and coding on Tableau server or Tableau cloud, we're going to be accessing APIs. We're going to be accessing the back end of the server. Now, there are certain things you can achieve really easily, and there are certain things that you have to go pretty deep down the rabbit hole to get to. So what I've done is I've identified the main tools that we use, and I have given you a sort of a risk rating. So we've got our software, we've got our documented APIs, and then we've got our undocumented APIs. What I'll do now is talk you through what they are, and then I will loop back and give you some practical examples of where we've had to go to within that scale to achieve the automation of a migration. So what are our softwares that we can just use off the shelf? Well, there's the Tableau content migrations tool. Well, there is if you bought the advanced management add-on to Tableau server. So the content migration tool will get you a long way. But the Tableau content migration tool was developed many moons ago by Interworks and then sold to Tableau. But it was developed primarily to promote content from dev to test to live or to production. It's not designed to bulk move content from one production environment to another. It can do a lot of the important jobs. It can change data sources, it can move the content, but it's a content migration tool. It doesn't move users, it doesn't create the projects, it doesn't create any of the structure that you need to be able to move the content. So if you're going to only use the content migration tool, you're going to have to manually create all your new users, create all your groups, create all your projects, and then start mapping your content over. And Tableau Desktop, that is our fallback option, fallback tool in every single case, because everything that you want to do, you can do using the UI in Tableau Cloud and Tableau Desktop. And realistically, what we're aiming to do is to work out how to automate these things so that you're not having to use Tableau Cloud and Tableau Desktop UIs and having to click 100 times to achieve things. So Tableau Desktop, again, we can do a load of work with it, but again, it doesn't allow us to create a huge amount on the cloud environment. So once you hit the roadblock, once you hit the brick wall of where you can get to with these nice safe tools, we have to start playing around in tools that are a bit more programmatic, getting into our coding. So our first stop, the REST API. Tableau Cloud's REST API, Tableau Server's REST API. We can do almost all of our work. So actually, you can probably do 80% of a migration with the REST API and the content migration tool, if you have straightforward content with straightforward requirements. If you have slightly less straightforward content with less straightforward requirements, you might need to start delving into some other tools. So the first one I'll talk about here is the Document API SDK. Again, when I delivered this in person, I asked the question, how many people have played around hacking the XML within Tableau Desktop? Well, the answer is if you have played around with the XML, if you've opened up your Tableau workbook in an XML editor, you probably want to play around with the Document API, because the Document API allows you to programmatically search through these things. There's libraries in there that do tons of really useful stuff. One that we don't use in our migration, but I would recommend anyone who wants to play around with Tableau XML do this, is the Document API has a library that allows you to do lineage of your calculations. So it has a recursive bit of code in there that searches through and links every parent calculation to its child calculations. So your final use of those fields or calculations within worksheets. It's quite a nifty little tool. But once again, there's only so far we can get by playing around with these APIs that are documented. There are some little niche use cases that, unfortunately, for some companies or some environments, are not quite so niche. They become showstoppers, and we had to overcome some pretty tricky issues. So we had to start playing around with the Viz Portal Client XML API. Now, if anyone here knows what the Viz Portal Client XML API is, I'll be very, very surprised. When you are working as a server architect, not an admin, but an architect, you have to be quite comfortable with all of the processes that are running in the background of Tableau Server. And one of those processes is called the Viz Portal. The Viz Portal is essentially the UI that people are interacting with when they're logged into Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud. The Viz Portal Client XML API is the way in which the Viz Portal interacts with all of the other bits and pieces behind Tableau Server. So if I click on something in the Viz Portal and it's going to say, I click on the button that says create a group, well, the Client XML API will invoke the REST API to create the group in the back end. If I click on something to change ownership of a piece of content, the Client XML API will kick off a call. Now, the Client XML API is not documented, it's not accessible, it is a little bit of a black box. Now, it's unsupported, and the reason it's unsupported is because Tableau are developing their product at such a pace that they can't let this API stop still long enough for it to be documented and made available for end users. Its development and its constant changing means that every time Tableau releases a new point release, we have to go back and run a whole bunch of our internal tests to make sure that the code that we've written still works, because the Client XML API will likely have been updated in that server upgrade. But how do we do it? Well, there's some blog posts out there. There's some people who have started the process of documenting elements of this API. Definitely worth reading about, and they're a good starter. If you are comfortable with playing around with the back end of Chrome or Safari or Firefox, whatever browser you're comfortable working in, you're going to want to use a tool called Fiddler. Fiddler Classic, not Fiddler Cloud. Fiddler Classic, it's a tool that you can install on your computer that will understand and make available to you all of the messages that are being sent between different parts of an application running on your computer. So if you've got Chrome open and you're logged into Tableau Server and you've got Fiddler in the background, every time you click on something, the messages that are being sent from the Viz Portal API to the other parts of Tableau Server are surfaced in essentially a log file format within Fiddler. And you can then search through those to try and find the API calls that you want to use to make these things happen. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what those API calls are, and I know that makes me super boring, but the reason is, if I say something now on a video recording, in 3 months' time, what I've said is no longer useful. It's no longer relevant. The code's changed. The calls have changed. So what I prefer to do is tell you where the pond is and give you a rod and say, go fish. So the pond is the Client XML API, and the rod you need is Fiddler, and you'll be able to understand what API calls you need to use to automate cloud interactions. The last one we played with is the content migration tool, SDK. So not the content migration tool, which is supplied by Tableau, but the SDK that sits behind it, because there is a ton of libraries that Tableau didn't choose to use when they compiled the content migration tool. So there's libraries in there that are left from the original build, and including libraries that were partially built and not completely finished and not completely tested yet. But there's some really powerful tools in there that go beyond what the CMT UI is actually capable of. But it's really complicated. It's built in C#, and the documentation for it is limited. So I've said at the end of this, even with all of these tools, there are still things we can't migrate in an automated way. And this is where I wanted to loop back to custom views. There is a custom view API being released, we believe, in early 2023. Now, normally when you go to a Salesforce event, they talk about don't make buying decisions based on future viewing things, only look at things that are available now. So please don't make a plan that you can migrate custom views in 3 months' time, because that API, whilst we've been told it's been released, we haven't had a chance to test it. We don't know what it can do yet. But I'm hoping that will allow us to migrate that final step of something that's really useful to people that isn't available to us yet in automation. Okay, so where did we have to go to, or how deep down the rabbit hole did we have to go to get over certain gotchas? So the first gotcha we came across, and it's one that I'm sure people that have worked on Tableau Server will be automatically thinking, well, Tableau Cloud, you can have a site, but Tableau Server is multi-tenant by default. So, well, how do you handle that multi-tenant situation on Tableau Cloud? Well, there's two options. One, you're really lucky and you've been very clever or sensible in your architecture and you've not reused the name of a project across multiple sites. Or you're going to go through the multiple sites on your server and ensure that none of those projects names are reused, in which case you can simply pick them up and shift them all into one Tableau Cloud site. Option 2 is to just use the site name as a parent project on your Tableau Cloud site and then install and then put in the child project underneath that head project. Now, anyone that's worked with Tableau Server is aware of the all users group. They also should be aware of the dangers of the all users group. Well, if you're going to be merging multiple sites, you're going to want to be really careful with the all users group, because on a server, the all users group is site specific. Once you've merged them all into one site, you're going to want to make sure that you've disabled accesses to all users and probably created a site B users and a site A users group instead to handle the prior functions from the all users groups on those prior sites. Now, to achieve this is all achievable just using the REST API. We didn't have to go anywhere down the rabbit hole. This is a fully documented API. We were able to just recreate all the projects we needed. We just had to do a little bit of planning, just make sure that we had our plan. We knew what we were going to migrate, how we were going to migrate it. Gotcha number 2. Oh, is it going to move? There we go. So I'm going to assume that anyone who's in a Tableau user group is aware that people just love their Excel files. They love extracting data from a data source, putting it into an Excel file, and then connecting a Tableau workbook to it. Even better than that, they like embedding that Excel file inside that Tableau workbook. So you've got a TWBX being published to Tableau Server. Now, clearly, that poses new problems to Tableau Cloud. You need a published data source to use Bridge. And if you're using Excel files that are held on a local network, then you're going to want to make sure you've got Tableau Bridge configured. And if you've got, like one of our clients, literally thousands of workbooks that are all connected to embedded Excel files within your Tableau server, one, you need a slap on the wrist, because that's some pretty poor architectural choices being made. But two, we had to dive into the Documenter API. We had to use the Documenter API to pull out the XML of the data source. If that data source was a live connection to an Excel file, fine. We were able to publish that as a TDS to our Tableau cloud environment and configure our bridge to allow us that connection. If we are talking about an extracted Excel file, well, you're going to have a TWBX file. So you're going to first of all have to unpackage that, take the Excel file that's in there, publish that as an extract to the server, take the XML out of the XML for the data source out, change it so that the workbook is now pointing at the published extract of that data source, and then go through the whole process of making sure that that extract is attached to a schedule, that extract is also configured to use bridge, and then you can reconnect everything as the workbook is published to the server. So there's a lot of hassle that goes into dealing with embedded data sources, because Tableau Cloud does not like embedded data sources unless they are connected to a cloud data source. So if you've got a Snowflake environment that you're extracting data into a Tableau workbook, that's fine. It can go on a schedule. Tableau server, Tableau cloud, so you can connect to Snowflake and download the data. But if you're using local file connections or local data sources like a local Tableau server, you're going to need to publish those data sources first so that Tableau Bridge can correctly use them and then connect your workbook back up to that. Now, the client XML, not the client, sorry, the Documenter API is the tool that allows you to do that, taking the XML apart and repackaging it so that the workbook is pointed at the right location, not the old location. So I'm going to leave this on for screen for a second before I talk. This is the other bit about Bridge. Okay. When we are moving people to Tableau Cloud, we've got to plan for, are we going to use Tableau Bridge to get to your local data center, or are we going to use IP whitelisting firewall? Now, again, if I talk about my 10 enterprise level clients, none of them, unsurprisingly, none of them were willing to whitelist the entire Tableau Cloud IP range. If we step down into some of the smaller clients that we've migrated, then yes, we have an example of a customer who was happy and willing to whitelist Tableau Cloud so that we didn't have to use Tableau Bridge, because we could simply set up a VPN tunnel using the IP whitelisting and firewall settings to get to our source data. Okay. Gotcha number 3. This is where we had to go a little bit deeper. So to achieve this, we had to use the client XML API to impersonate a user, and we had to use the CMT SDK to encrypt the traffic using Tableau server's encryption key. So the main thing we're talking about here is prep flows, because to have correct ownership of the prep flow, it has to be published by the person who's going to own it. So unlike workbooks where you can just go in and change the owner after you've published the content, Tableau prep flows don't work in the same way. You need to impersonate the owner when you're publishing content to cloud. And OAuth was the single biggest challenge we've overcome this year, and it took a significant amount of effort to understand how to intercept the encrypted messaging between Tableau Cloud and Tableau Desktop during the publishing process, so that when we downloaded the workbooks, we were able to maintain the OAuth credentials and not require someone to have to log in to re-enter their OAuth credentials for everything they own. there was a client for whom everything, literally everything they did was on over an OAuth connection. And we're talking about thousands of workbooks connected to hundreds of data sources. So we had to overcome this problem. So by combining the client XML API and the CMT SDK, we were able to impersonate users and encrypt the traffic, so that at no point were we exposing user credentials to the open web. Essentially, it's a little bit of ethical hacking. So that's the 3 examples of where we've gone down the rabbit hole. So number 1, we only need the REST API. Number 2, we needed to go to the document API. Number 3, we had to go all the way down to the client XML API and the CMT SDK. Right, very briefly, because I believe I've got about 3 minutes left of my 40 minutes, or according to my timer I have. Testing, technical testing. There's some simple things you can do. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure you run the same data collection that you did prior to migration. So you extract data from Tableau Cloud, you extract data from Tableau Server, and you do a simple reconciliation between the two. Have I got the number? Have I got all the users I expected? Have I got all the projects I expected? Are all the workbooks there? Brilliant, great. If you are doing this in a programmatic way, API calls will tend to give you a success or failure notification. So just keeping a log of your API call success and failures will tell you whether or not you've got a problem while the migration is going ahead. And then a little top tip I'll leave you with on the technical testing is, when you've finished, use a simple programmatic tool. TabJolt is great, a great one for this. Log into the server as various users and run the image download, the PNG generator, on a whole bunch of your workbooks. In fact, I would say all of your workbooks. If the image doesn't render, it means there's a problem, which means you're going to want to pass that over to someone to actually manually go and investigate as part of the UAT. If you're getting an image out, maybe you've got someone in your team who does some cool AI that can say, well, this image and image A from the server and image B from cloud is identical. So you can do some cool work around that. But UAT, who, what, how long? I think, as I said at the beginning, this is something that could be a presentation in itself. UAT is who uses your reports. They should be involved in UAT. I am not a fan of very, very limited scope UATs where we say, well, we're going to give it to these, we've got 5,000 users, but we're going to give it to these 5 to check. And we're going to just check one workbook out of each project, but there's hundreds of workbooks in each project. And we're only going to do it for the next week, even though most of our reports refresh on a monthly or quarterly schedule. So I think what I'm trying to say is UAT should reflect normal usage of your environment. If you've got hundreds of users logging in every day, then you want hundreds of users logging in every day to your UAT. You want them to be looking at the reports they would normally look at. You want them to be looking at them. You want to be doing this over that period for long enough that the majority of your refresh schedules have taken place in a natural way, not an unnatural way. You don't want to be refreshing things daily just for UAT when actually they only refresh once a quarter, because if the underlying data hasn't actually changed between one and the next, then how do you know that the process has actually worked? So plenty of things to talk about in UAT. It's a presentation in itself. It's a discussion for you and your organization. But suffice to say that UAT is essential. You should not sign off a migration until you've had a sufficient period with a sufficient volume of views, with a sufficient number of people taking part in UAT. If you talk to Tableau, I am sure they will let you maintain a Tableau server license beyond its expiry date if you are taking part in a migration to cloud. So if you've moved your license estate to cloud, they will give you the ability to keep your Tableau server environment up for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months in parallel. And that leads you to one last point, which is changing over people's URLs, people's connections, how are they going to access it? That's another project. It's about communication, it's about managing people's expectations, and it's about making it clear when you have switched over and when they're looking at Tableau Cloud versus Tableau Server. I've seen some neat little tricks where people just change the color of the header area, or they put a little logo in the top corner to say this is now UAT until they've stopped, until the cloud is signed off. Every single workbook had a little UAT logo added at a specific location, which again you can achieve that with a document API. Okay, that's testing. Now let's see if there's any questions. I see there's no questions have been asked in the webinar yet. How did that come across in the room, guys? Was that okay? Was it all a bit nerdy? How did I mute Torre's computer? Right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can all look at my beautiful face. There we go.
There's the unmute. Okay, thank you, Chris. Any questions from the audience? Really? It was crystal clear, and so that means you had a really good presentation, Chris.
It's either that or I've just presented to a room full of Tableau desktop enthusiasts who are half asleep now.
No, I don't think so. And of course, the recording will be published, so people can go back and look at all the useful information. So thank you so much, and good luck at soccer practice or match. Was it?
It's a match. Yes, my son's playing. My son's playing in a match. So Torre has my email address. I will. Anyone is more than welcome to email me or contact me on Twitter, or if anyone's got any questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking in the room, I'm happy to respond by email afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Ja, da skal vi straks på med Forskningsrådet og Kristine, men vi tar en 5 minutters pause bare for å få litt teknisk prestasjon opp da. Yes, da vi straks klart til å begynne til dere igjen der hjemme. All right, da har vi vært så heldige at vi har fått få besøk av Forskningsrådet og Kristine, som skal prate om deres reise. Det var et veldig sterkt lys. Takk, Tore. Dere har jobbet med Tableau siden 2018, etter hva jeg har forstått, og skal fortelle litt om den reisen, hvordan dere bruker det til analyseformål. Så da vil jeg egentlig bare gi ordet til deg, og så det også tid til noen spørsmål til Kristine. Så, vær så god.
Jeg på? Ja. Ja, det litt enklere presentasjon enn dette var i sted. En litt annen type. Jeg skulle gjerne vært en big nerd jeg også, men jeg har ikke helt skillset til han som presenterte nå i sted. Men vi håper jo at når vi kommer litt videre, at vi skal sette oss litt mer inn i arkitekturen vår som jobber i forretninger da. Men vi har jo en IT-avdeling som bistår oss med mange ting. Jeg heter Kristine, jeg jobber i Forskningsrådet i avdeling for dataforvaltning og analyse. Og i denne presentasjonen så innser jeg at jeg skal bruke en del tid på å gå gjennom en formel som for mange her sikkert ganske enkel, vil jeg tro. Men det har spart oss for masse tid, og jeg skal komme litt tilbake til hvordan det dilemmaet var, og hvordan vi løste det. Ikke bildtast. Der, ja. Så da tenker jeg å gå igjennom disse punktene her. Hvordan vi fremme med anskaffer Tableau, hvordan vi har organisert det. Veldig overordnet om teknisk løsning som vi har gått for. Jeg jobber som sagt ikke på IT. Hvordan vi har brukt det til internt bruk, det var da vi egentlig anskaffet for å bruke det til. Og hvordan vi har brukt det på eksterne nettsider på forskningsrådet.no. Og litt hvordan erfaringene har vært, og hvordan vi ser for oss gå videre med det. Så vi anskaffet det i 2015. Det var et behov for et visualiseringsverktøy i organisasjonen til internt bruk, først og fremst. Og vi hadde veldig lite kunnskap om hva som fantes, og hvordan det eventuelt måtte settes opp, hva som var bra, hva vi burde se etter, så vi fikk konsulenthjelp til å utarbeide konkurransegrunnlaget. Og vi fikk 7 tilbud, og Tableau ble valgt, og det var RAV Norge som leverte det til oss. Litt av grunnen til at vi ville ha et visualiseringsverktøy jo at vi en stor organisasjon med over 400 ansatte, og det en veldig kunnskapshungrig organisasjon. Mange drev og tok ut sine egne data, en del brukte Power BI, men det var liksom ikke noe samlet, og vi hadde lite kontroll på hva data folk tok ut, og hvordan de brukte de. Utklokkene var ulike, og da å levere datagrunnlag samlet via et sånt verktøy ville sikre oss bedre konsistens i hva data som ble brukt. Så i 2016 så ruller vi det forsiktig ut, når vi ganske få lisenser, bare 7 desktop-lisenser. Vi hadde en del web-lisenser som vi kalte det da, jeg tror det det som heter Explorer i dag. Og så brukte vi Tableau Reader en del for å nå store deler av organisasjonen. Det var litt kronglete, husker jeg. Så i dag har vi mye flere creator-lisenser til utvikling, og vi har disse viewer-lisensene, som ikke nok til alle i organisasjonen. Men vi bytter litt rundt på dem, og det ikke alle som har behov for det vi lager nå. Og så den tekniske løsningen. Vi har jo hatt datavarehus med en stjernemodell, og tanken var at Tableau skal hente data derifra. Da måtte IT hjelpe oss med. Så han kanskje litt ladet den delen av setningen, der i tillegg til allerede eksisterende oppgaver knyttet til datavarehus. For nå var det oss i forretningen som valgte at vi skulle ha dette verktøyet og ikke IT-avdelingen. Så en ting var jo at de hadde en del eksisterende oppgaver knyttet til datavarehus. Noe annet var vel at de hadde ganske mange oppgaver knyttet til datavarehus, så Tableau kom på toppen. Så de ville gjerne at vi skulle være mest mulig selvhjelpende. Så løsningen var at de lagde sånne flate filer, de normaliserte tabeller til oss, og la de ut i Tableau, sånn at vi kunne gå inn på Tableau desktop og hente de der via en SQL-server og koble de sammen. Og det var det som var realistisk å få til på det tidspunktet, og sånn det enda. Og det har vært snakk om at det ikke nødvendigvis var den mest ideelle løsningen, så det jo også snakk om at det på sikt skal endres. Så sånn ser i alle fall dataflyten ut da. Vi har et datavarehus på toppen som henter data fra mange ulike kilder, både eksterne og interne. Vi har Kristin som ekstern, og så henter vi også data fra Brønnøysund blant annet. Og så har vi alle andre relevante datakilder, det i stor grad Excel-filer, som vi henter ut for eksempel nasjonal statistikk på FOU, som vi sammenligner med våre egne data. Så her, den pilen ned, det jo der vi lager disse denormaliserte tabellene fra datavarehus til Tableau. Så da henter vi disse denormaliserte tabellene i Tableau. Vi lager ekstrakt, altså datagrunnlag. Publiserer de vel egentlig på serveren, og så lager vi rapporter ut av disse ekstraktene. Og vi publiserer til Tableau Public på eksterne nettsider. Og så har vi også Business Objects, som et annet verktøy som ligger oppe på dette varehuset, som vi har brukt veldig masse, og som nok fremdeles go-to-verktøy for ganske mange i organisasjonen, som kanskje ikke helt komfortable med Tableau. Men de lever side om side. Og her egentlig, jeg skal ikke gå så veldig mye inn på den her, men da kildene våre. Og i midten så står det prosjektinformasjon. For i Forskningsrådet så lyser vi jo ut penger til forskningsprosjekt. De som får bevilgning, de får et prosjektnummer. Og det prosjektnummeret nøkkelen i kildesystemene våre. Så i den som heter prosjektinformasjon så har vi på en måte en tabell, i alle fall i Tableau, som en veldig enkel tabell. Der har et prosjektnummer, titel, og så masse informasjon om prosjektet i ulike kolonner. Så hvert prosjektnummer har en rad. I noen av disse andre, som for eksempel merker som på topprande, så vil hvert prosjektnummer ha flere rader. Og det blir litt mer komplisert for oss i Tableau å bruke det, for vi må være nøye på at vi treffer riktig rad, at vi ikke summerer de sammen. Det merkesystemet vårt da at hvert prosjekt som får bevilgning, de blir tagget med ulike temaer av saksbehandler, basert på prosjektets innhold. Og det et ganske stort merkesystem å ha, med mange emneknagger som saksbehandler kan velge. For eksempel, de kan merke et prosjekt med klima, hav, IKT, og så videre, og så lager vi statistikk på det. Ja, og så bare litt om organiseringen. Som jeg sa, så det forretningen som har ansvaret for Tableau i Forskningsrådet. Og da tror jeg har vært riktig. Det vi som skal bruke det direkte, som har god kontroll på utviklingen i det. Men vi har savnet en god nok forankring i IT-avdelingen, og gjerne et større eierskap fra IT. Da tror jeg både IT-avdelingen og oss hadde hatt glede av. I tillegg så har vi mange som bruker Tableau av og til, og kanskje at det blir byttet litt på hvem som skal ta ut disse tallene, og hvem som skal bruke de, så det en grad av lite fortrolighet blant en del brukere når det gjelder brukerverktøyene, så vi bruker en del tid på opplæring, rett og slett, hvor de skal finne tallene. Og så skal jeg gå inn på hvordan vi bruker Tableau. Jeg tenker I forhold til det han Chris presenterte I sted, så nok vi en ganske liten, har et lite bruksområde. Jeg ser her, altså på det internettet vårt, så har vi cirka 27 selvbetjenings, altså ulike visninger da. Jeg vet ikke om det riktig ord, men jeg har begynt å kalle det for visninger I Tableau, rapporter, arbeidsbøk. Så her en sånn portal som vi har på internettet vårt, og bak disse knappene her, når vi trykker det videre inn, så det totalt cirka 27 ulike selvbetjeningsløsninger. Og det alt fra nøkkeltall, årsrapportering, øvrige porteføljer, der har vi samlet masse forskjellig. Og så den røde tall til porteføljestyrene, den skal jeg gå litt mer inn på etterpå. Den vært det som mest brukt. Og de har mest nytt av Tableau. Og så skal jeg bare vise litt av de selvbetjeningsløsningene. Den her brukte årsrapport. Jeg husker ikke hvor mange departement som finansierer Forskningsrådet, men det nesten alle. Og vi leverer årsrapport til alle. Og tidligere har vi tatt ut separate tall til hver årsrapport. Nå har vi bestemt oss for å standardisere det. Alle som skal skrive årsrapport for sitt departement får samme tallgrunnlag. Vi leverer det I Tableau, og det ser det en sånn filter der, at man velger sitt departement, og så får man opp sin tall. Vi har ulike porteføljevisninger som vi kaller det, eller øvrige porteføljer ligger der under. Vi har visninger på doktorgradsstipendiater, som vi veldig opptatt av I Forskningsrådet, og internasjonalt samarbeid, som også en stor greie. Og så, selv om de ganske enkle, disse visningene, så har de spart oss for en god del tid og henvendelser. Så nå hvis vi får spørsmål her I analyseavdelingen, og vi kan finne ut hvor masse som har blitt gjort I prosjekt med samarbeid I Belgia, så kan vi bare henvise dem til den visningen. Samtidig igjen, det gir oss kontroll på å utplukke at de alltid henter ut av samme. Og så det disse porteføljevisningene. Vi innførte porteføljestyring I 2019. Vi skulle ha 16 porteføljer. Og vår avdeling skulle levere et tallgrunnlag til alle, for de skulle skrive årlige analyser. Så da skal jeg bare si litt raskt om datagrunnlaget til disse porteføljevisningene. For nå var det ganske masse tall som skulle leveres, og som skulle brukes jevnlig. Så det var ikke sånn et engangsuttak. Og da vi inne på denne eller på disse merkingsdataene. Og dilemmaet da var at vi skal ta, altså hvis du ser den matrisen der da, så har vi et prosjektnummer. Så prosjekt nummer 1 har 3 emneknagger, eller merke, klima, hav, IKT. Prosjekt nummer 2, 3, og prosjekt nummer 3 har hav og IKT. Så for eksempel I klimaporteføljen, så skulle vi hente ut alle prosjekt som merket med klima, men samtidig alle radene. Så vi skulle ha et definert utplukk av prosjektnummer, men vi ville ha mulighet og fleksibilitet til å kunne se på alle radene. Alt dette sånn. Og da skulle gjerne brukeren kunne styre litt. Så hvis vi hadde satt på et filter på klima, så hadde vi jo fått riktige prosjektnummer, men vi hadde ikke mulighet til å velge rad, så vi hadde mistet den flerdimensjonaliteten som var viktig I porteføljestyringen I Forskningsrådet. Så du ser da, hvis vi hadde valgt klima og så valgt hav, så hadde det tatt med prosjekt nummer 3, men det ikke I klimaporteføljen. Så hvis vi skulle se på havinnsatsen innenfor klimaporteføljen, så vil vi ikke ha med hav. Nei, ikke ha med prosjekt nummer 3. Så I starten så løste vi da med å definere utplukket I selve datagrunnlagene, eller I de ekstraktene som publiserte og brukte som datagrunnlag. Det borteste bildet der, det jo fra Data Source I desktop-versjonen, desktop-appen, heter det kanskje. Der vi har lagt inn helt til høyre, så sa det at vi har dratt inn en sånn DT. Og så har vi lagt på mer informasjon, så vi sier at vi skal ha alle prosjektnummer som merket med den koden som merket I gult der, og da koden til klimamerket. Så da får vi med de prosjektnumrene som inneholder klima, men vi definerer ikke rad. Og så er det med et filter inne i hver arbeidsbok. Nå ble det en arbeidsbok per portefølje, som definerte rad, og da var lagt opp sånn at da kunne vi enkelt styre, eller vi kunne la bruker til å styre det selv. Så da hadde vi den fleksibiliteten til å se alle disse dimensjonene. For eksempel, hvis brukeren hadde valgt hav, da, så hadde den fremdeles vært innenfor den, og hadde ikke tatt ned den prosjekten på 3. Men vi satt jo da igjen med 16 datagrunnlag og 16 visninger, som skulle vedlikeholdes jevnlig. Og det er jo ikke sånn at vi sitter og jobber fulltid med disse visningene her. Så det ble litt jobb med vedlikehold og oppdateringer. Og så skulle vi ha delporteføljer, og da hadde vi fått til sammen 30 porteføljer. Og hvis vi skulle ha 30 datagrunnlag og 30 visninger som skulle vedlikeholdes, så hadde det blitt veldig mye jobb. Så da fikk vi inn en ekstern konsulent som hjalp oss med å få en formel, sånn at vi kunne gå fra 16 datagrunnlag og 16 visninger til 1 datagrunnlag og 1 visning, der bruker selv kunne velge. Konsulenten kalte det for en matrosjka-dukkeformel, som er koblet til en parameter, for det er flere funksjoner som ligger inne i en annen. Og den velger utplukk av prosjektnummer. Så den parameteret, hvis man velger verdi nummer 7, altså klimaporteføljen, står det klima og polar, men klimaporteføljen, så er det jo den rad nummer 7 man velger der. Så den største dere, det er jo da at man har en case-portefølje som gjør at den er koblet sammen med parameteren. Og så har du en true-false inni det, som sier at hvis du velger 7 og noe er sant, så, og da har vi en fixed eller deformel inni det, som sier at da skal Tableau gå gjennom kolonner med alle prosjektnumrene og velge de som tilfredsstiller en viss betingelse. Og da er det en liten if-dukke inni der, som sier at da skal velge alle prosjekt som har prosjektmerkekode PS Klimpol, som altså er klimamerket. Så da velger han de riktige prosjektnumrene. Og utenpå der igjen så har vi også koblet til det samme parameteret, der vi har valgt ut 3 rader for akkurat denne klimaporteføljen da, som brukeren kan velge mellom. Her kunne vi jo lagt til mange flere, men akkurat i dette tilfellet var det naturlig at brukeren hadde 3 valg. Så da, akkurat i dette tilfellet her, så har vi valgt klimaraden, og for brukeren så ser det da sånn ut. At de først har et parameter, der man bestemmer utplukket, og så har de en formel der de får et gitt antall valgområder. Og så får de opp disse porteføljemonitoreringsvisningene, som du ser det er flere faner bortover, som de bruker til å skrive sine årlige porteføljeanalyser. Jeg tenker det er greit med spørsmål og kommentarer etter hvert, hvis det er noe også. Og så tenkte jeg skulle bare si litt om hvordan vi har brukt Tableau på Forskningsrådet.no. Dette er en første generasjonsvisning som vi hadde. Da var ikke nettsidene våre tilpasset til Tableau, tror jeg. Eller da funket i alle fall ikke så veldig bra, så vi hadde en lenke på nettsidene våre, Forskningsrådet.no, der det stod at her kan du se på kjønnsbalanse. Og så kom man på en måte ut av nettsiden vår og inn på Tableau. Det fungerte greit, men det er ikke så veldig pent. Samme med at vi etter hver søknadsfrist så publiserer vi statistikk for de søknadene som har kommet inn. Den også ligger på, eller den ligger selvfølgelig på Tableau Public, men lenker viser også til Tableau Public. Og her er neste generasjon. Da har vi fått det embeddet inn på nettsidene våre. Det ser litt bedre ut. Vi har en liten vei å gå, for at vi har ikke klart å få det til å dekke hele siden, som har sånn irriterende skyggefelt på siden der, fremdeles. Så da er nettsideansvarlig som ser på hvorfor det ikke vil stemme. Og her er vår nyeste baby, Forskningsrådet i tall. Inntil i fjor så var den jeg lenker til en Excel-fil med masse tall om Forskningsrådet, som vi nå har fått ut i Tableau og gjort mye mer brukervennlig og bedre. Så erfaringer hittil, det i alle hovedsak gode tilbakemeldinger fra brukerne våre, altså internt i organisasjonen. Hvis det har vært noe negativt, så har det kanskje gått mer på hva type data vi har fremstilt, at vi heller ville hatt noe annet. Litt kluss med opplæring, men det har nok med at det en del som ikke bruker det så veldig ofte. De har fått tilgang til masse informasjon på en enkel måte, og som vi har bedre kontroll enn før. Jeg tror vi har redusert antall skyggeregnskap rundt om på huset ved å bruke Tableau. Det fleksibelt og tidsbesparende for oss som sitter og produserer disse sidene. Vi trenger ikke ta ut nye tall per bestilling. Og en egentlig veldig bra ting at det blottlegger nivået for datakvalitet. Når vi ligger alt ut, så blir det veldig lett å få tilbakemeldinger på om det er noe som ikke stemmer, og vi ser selv også hva som er feil, og så har vi rettet den kilden. Og da genererer nye ønsker på statistikkområdet, og da er jo alltid gøy. Når folk ser det, så ser de jo hva de egentlig trenger. Videre arbeid med Tableau i Forskningsrådet. Vi skal jo fortsette å gjøre det vi allerede gjør nå, men vi håper vi gjør det enda bedre. Vi ønsker å bruke det mer til analyse. Frem til nå så har vi egentlig bare fremstilt data. Masse deskriptive data som vil ligge ut. Og vi ønsker egentlig å koble det sammen med R. Og det I årevis har det vært snakk om at disse porteføljevisningene våre så bør vi ha prediksjoner. Og vi har fått beskjed om at Tableau ikke det beste verktøyet til det, men vi kan koble det med andre analyseverktøy. Der det faktisk en liten hva skal jeg si, en issue med IT-avdelingen om hva vi får lov til å laste ned og ikke, så vi har ikke klart å koble de to sammen enda det står i kø. Det var det jeg hadde.
Ikke kommet til noen spørsmål på Zoom. Det noen som har noen spørsmål om Forskningsrådet? Der kommer det.
Ja, jeg vet ikke om det et spørsmål som mye om at det veldig gjennomførbart. Det dere beskriver. Og det med problemet som med dårlige og manuelt registrerte data. Når man ikke har noen standard eller gode om, så det liksom bare utrolig hva det måtte gjøre. En tid at det kommer inn. Ja.
Ja, jeg synes jo...
Forskning og høyere utdanning, det
ja,
helt sikkert.
Det tror jeg. Jeg har inntrykk av at det går frem med det, i alle fall.
Du sa jo litt om brukergruppene. Du hadde blant annet noen rapporter som departementene kan se på, men så var det også en del som ble lagt ut på internett. Hvem typisk brukere hos dere?
Det veldig mange som jobber opp mot disse porteføljestyrene våre, som vi har 16 stykker, som bruker disse visningene jevnt og trutt.
Hvor mange brukere det?
Vi har jo 168 sånne viewer-lisenser. Ja. Jeg tror ikke alle i daglig bruk, for å si det sånn. Har du noen tanker om det?
Nei, det jo det. På selve, ja, på hvordan brukes det ganske ofte. Da tror jeg man kanskje alle lisenser på basis, så det litt mer
Ja, og så til årsrapporter, og det jo også veldig sånn periode, det liksom på vinteren og våren. Det kanskje det største trykket egentlig. Vinter og vår.
Yes, veldig bra. En liten pluss, og så har vi vel en liten gave kanskje. Det alltid litt merch.
Det jo litt igjen til at det å stille an, men på et tablåglass. Og så kan du få velge, ja, for det kommer til for deg. Det spørsmålet om du vil ha en termokopp eller en kaffekopp, det mer i porselen.
Den tar jeg opp.
Vær så god.
Tusen takk.
Da,
Yes, da det over til Kahoot.
ja. Så alle har vel Kahoot-appen, har du ikke det? Så. Sånn her. Sånn, hallo. Da var den på ja. Da gjør vi sånn, skal vi se. Vi har noen med fortsatt online, så hvis dere har lyst til å være med på Kahoot, så skulle dere få lov til det. Den skal jeg bare åpne først da, så ikke... Jeg var jo egentlig klar, men jeg måtte restarte. Jeg er mest spent på å se hvordan... Så var det noe... Er det noe for Tableau her i dag? Mens Jakob er her. Jeg synes det var så kaldt, så han droppet det faktisk. Men jeg ser i hvert fall noen partnere her, som salgsfolk. Så jeg gleder meg til å se hvor flinke det er i dag, for da blir det en Kahoot om Tableau, som er litt sånn teknisk, som sikkert passer dere som de fleste av dere som sitter her. Simen, min kollega, Atle sitter baki der. Så har vi fått fra Visma her også, er det 2 day, er det det? Noen av dere her i dag? Det tar ikke innrømme det kanskje, hvis de... Nei. Men vi sier i hvert fall 1000 takk til de 3 firmaene der da, i Meta, KPMG og 2 day, fordi de har da betalt for pizza, drikke, og når vi skal ut og inn på Skråplent etterpå, så har vi litt penger til oss til å nyte litt brus eller hva folk har lyst på. Så da kommer Kahooten veldig straks opp her. Får vi starte den. Basic mode. Sånn, kommer snart en gamepin. Er det noen som aldri har spilt Kahoot før? Alle vet hvordan Kahoot fungerer. To stykker her inne, så er det noen online. Nei, men dere som er online, dere blir med da, sant? Siden dere fortsatt er online. Så tenker jeg at dette kan vi jo lære mye av, men det er ikke noe vits i å kjøre opptak av dette som dere skal se igjen Kahooten etterpå, sant? Så jeg stopper opptaket nå. Mens dere får logge dere på.